Hi, everybody. Mary Long here from Plein Air Painters Chicago. I'm very excited to have Don Yang as our critic today. I met Don as actually at Urban Sketchers Chicago. And what was fun about that for me was that I had been attempting to do watercolor, which I was not happy with. And but it was the first time Don had tubes of paint for us, and it was the first time I ever painted oil painting. And Lori just mentioned it was 2016, so it's been very exciting to know that that's one of the roots for me is kind of where I began in some of my paintings. So I'm excited to have Don here as one of our critics because he is just a fabulous painter himself. I was talking with another artist the other day who has been doing portraits, who said one of Don's classes, one of his regular portrait classes that he does in the studio just was enough to just change her painting. So because he's a consummate teacher, and I think that's what we've seen at his demos is that he is just, no word is wasted in his teaching. So we really appreciate that. And I'm very excited to have him here today. So welcome, Don Yang.
Thank you, Mary, for kind words. Yeah, that's I don't know how to take that, but I appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for having me and spending time with me Saturday morning. Before I get into the critique of individual paintings, I'd like to go over a few things here. Number one is the title or the theme you saw in the email. It's something that Mary and I talked about when we had a Zoom meeting in preparation for this, and then she wanted to have some the theme oriented the session, and I didn't really, because I saw there are some themes that dealt with by Steve and others in the past, so I didn't really get to come up with anything. So I told her I just deal with them mostly fundamentals because that's what I tend to do. Also, that's generally the class I teach at the academy. So basic fundamentals such as accurate drawing and perspective, color harmony, and so on. So that's what I told her, and then she put that up as a title. The only reason I'm saying this is that way you know that at the end of it, if you feel like, I didn't really deal with the drawing aspect as strong as you expected, and that's because it wasn't quite the main intention of mine that to focus on drawing itself, but mostly broad fundamentals there. Another thing here I'd like to talk about here is I'm sure you already know, having done this before, there's always some limitations on the critique, especially when we are doing the Zoom, looking at the screen image as opposed to real painting, and so on. So there's always some risk of miscommunication, not seeing the color properly the way I see on my screen that is different from your original, and so on. So please be understanding and bear with me if some of those misunderstanding happens and so on. It also happens that because wasn't really looking at the image that you are confronted when you are painting. So I'm sure the light changes, shadow changes, and so on you experienced. And if I was there next to you, standing next to you, then I could see exactly what you're looking at and so on. So not having the reference in front of me, so there's some room for mistakes and so on. So if you can be a little, the understanding of that, that would be great, very helpful. And also critique, obviously, it always carries some, I guess, the artistic bias or preference, depending on who's doing it. I'm sure I carry my emphasis and bias in as to, based upon my experience, my education, my training, my preference, and so on. So just because I say certain things, that doesn't mean it is always 100% true for everybody in every the cases and so on. So if you can take it with some grain of salt, that I always find it more helpful when you do the critique of art. The way I said, you got the extreme one end of abstraction or conceptual art to very hyper realism and so on. So matter of you finding your preference and so on. As long as the way I said is I am honest with what I'm trying to do, and I stick with the fundamentals, then I can always veer off one way or the other. So it's not, say, a statement of a judgment as to, okay, you didn't do this right, you didn't do this right and wrong, and so on. So again, that's something that I like to keep in mind there. And also during the critique, I'm going to be making some comparisons from between one paint and another and so on. I would point out some painting, some aspects of one painting to illustrate what I'm trying to say for another painter's painting and so on. Again, it is not the matter of statement of that he or she's done better in this painting and then another painting and so on. It's just a matter of, it helps me to make my point sometimes that when I extract some elements from one painting and make some statement to another painting and so on, okay? And finally, it does help me, I know the Mary, put this out, or help anybody to know the medium and the size of the painting, especially the size. That way I know if it's small size, then I would not make certain recommendations versus if it's larger sizes and so on. It helps me to have some context of why I'm making certain recommendations, statements, and so on. So something that you may want to consider, okay? All right, any questions? If not, we can start off with what I did is I downloaded all the images from Facebook, the site. I first thought, I talked to Mary as well, once that indicated that this was for today's critique and so on, because I think that's what Mary emailed you out to indicate those things. And then later on, I communicated with Mary and she said, no, there are other paintings that didn't indicate that the fact that the painting was meant for the critique, but you should include it. So I went back in and I also downloaded it too. And then I spent some time writing things about it, thinking about it, writing things about it last night. And I made some notation on my note here. So I'm looking at two iPads here. I'm doing Zoom with you, and I got a smaller, older one that I'm looking at my note that I wrote down last night and this morning. And then, so altogether, I downloaded 51 images, including some reference photos. So altogether, I have 27 people participating. I thought it was supposed to be a little smaller when Mary told me today being the holiday and so on. So I appreciate having confidence in me to entrust me with it. So kind of a humbling here. I'm going to start off with Andrea's painting. Hi, Andrea. She said it was 9 by 12 size, and I can see very heavy texture appearance to it. So I really like that, the texture appearance to it. And as far as choice of scene is concerned, I would say it's a very ambitious, the scene. So she wasn't she didn't shy away from the finding that scene, that there is very, a lot of things happening here, like a person and the car, and then that very iconic, complicated building and so on. So very bold approach in doing that. And now a few things I noticed that here is about the values, since you are looking at quite a distance between, say, the person and car and then foreground, the buildings and so on. I would be careful about the values on these very deep dark, especially this strong contrast that can really project those images far forward there. So since you are seeing quite a distance there, I would definitely decrease the contrast in the values, and even the temperature wise, I would cool it down and so on. So I would watch out for these dark values in the foreground. Now in the foreground, you certainly like to create some strong the contrast in the value and the intensity and so on, intensity of the color and so on. But the foreground, I would be careful about that. Nice soft edges, again, they always help with the far distances as well, to give a sense of the atmospheric perspective. The location, at first I didn't know what it was. Later on, I got to know, there must be the bus. And in that case, I might have placed it somewhere, different places, instead of they all loaded up in the same area. They're kind of boxed in there. So I might want it to kind of overlap compositionally in different place there. It's really tough situation because I'm thinking maybe Wacker Drive or over the bridge, which means there are lots of cars and so on. So how to handle that, that's very tough situation. One way you like to do that is give some suggestive appearance of a busy appearance. That way it doesn't look like there's a one car, one person, one bus in wide open street scene there. So that's what I thought about it. Let me take a look at my note, what I have here. Oh, kind of a similar thing about the position of the bus. Just watch out for the tangency. Again, that's how it creates kind of a boxy appearance to it, and then that gave me a little bit of confusion as to what that was there. Again, when you deal with such a large space, I find it very important that you try to focus in certain focal point and try not to get drawn into a lot of other elements, because it is there, especially if you have a photo reference, it is there. It's hard to resist the temptation, but it can be really difficult too. And also those can be really complicated, your focal point there. So that's what I was thinking when looking at this data painting. Again, I really like the strong textural appearance that really gives a projection of that the foreground images there.
Dan, would you have considered just leaving out the bus entirely? Because directionality was the problem. You have one going one direction, completely opposite bus.
Yeah.
I moved it over. Sometimes your viewpoint, your viewing of the piece will go outside to the left. And
right, that's a good point. So I wouldn't move too far out, just enough to avoid such a strong tangency and then complete blocked in by these elements. So maybe make it stick out a little bit one way or the other. That's I was thinking there. Okay, next person was Lynette. Hi, Lynette. So this is the 100 years anniversary, the photo reference, and this is a nice watercolor painting. So I really like the technique and the color and even texture of that color gradation from blue to slight, looks like alizarin and so on. Nicely the transitioning there. That's really nice there. The way I see it is the very warm temperature here, very strong focal point. There's no mistake whatsoever where the focal point here is. Now, when I first saw it, I thought maybe this perspective of the barn was a little off there. But then when I took a look at the reference photo, I guess the barn was really old barn. It is indeed slightly crooked or falling off or something like that. So that makes sense there. Few things here. Again, I really like the far distance effect of the soft edges, more diffused edges, and that green is certainly not as intense as that, so that gives a nice sense of a recession or receding part there. Now this one seems to be a little too strong value conscious against the rooftop, so this really stands out, combined with a very strong edge of that there. So considering that that's the far going away from the viewer, I find this to be a little too strong between the combination between the very strong dark value and also very hard edges and so on. So I would probably like to treat it a little more, maybe not exactly the same, but more like that kind of appearance to it. Even the general, the linear direction of that road, clearly it leads to your focal point there. And I really like the warm temperature appearance that very well. Let me see what else I have there. Yeah, and then all the detailing, intense color, green, yellow, red, and so on. So that really projects out as a strong focal point there. So that's I really like it. Okay, and then also placement of that there. So very nice watercolor piece. It carries a lot of great fundamentals that you like to see in creating the focal point and so on. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And let's move on to this one was, oh, where did I write the name? Okay, Elizabeth. So this is the painting, and this is her photo reference. And this is her value thumbnail sketch there. And yeah, it's always good to see. I really love this thumbnails, and sometimes not this case, but sometimes in my own painting, I end up liking my own thumbnails better than my painting there. Now I noticed that in the thumbnail, it's got lots of annotations on like the values and also like temperatures and so on. She like cool and warm here, so obviously she was very cognizant about the temperature, the shifts there. And I'm assuming this is a beginning stage, more of a color blocking wash stage there. So that, and here as well, and there. So when I was looking at it here, she's got very strong value contrast from very deep dark against the light and so on, and also mid-ground. So she covered all the value ranges there, especially very strong contrast on the focal point there. And I really like the, I guess again, she was very, wanted to indicate the color temperature. So I see very warm, the light temperature there. And that's what we see on this photo reference as well, very warm temperature there. The only thing here is that if when you do that, I think that you could have gives more color temperature in the shadow area there. So as opposed to this being dark value, which is necessary, but also maybe added more influence the blues and or the greens and purples and so on. I think if you've done that, that'll even enhance the warm temperature even more as well, even in the shadow. I think down the line, I forgot whose painting was, oh, I think it's a Maureen's painting that shows very impressionistic, the cooler the temperature that really enhances the light side of that by contrast. So that would have create a much stronger intention of the color temperature contrast I see in your notation and your the value the study there. Now that is a lot of detail that's kind of tricky because that's what we see here. So obviously you like to go with a very simplified or suggestive approach to it. So that's really tough what to do. And I would like to just leave just one straight lines or give some suggestive appearances. So that is quite a high degree of difficulty that one has to do that. So that's a good challenge there. Same with here as well in the corner. And what else I wrote down here? Clear shadows. Oh, watch out for the hard edges. So be careful about the edges, especially these here, particularly when hard edges are combined with the strong color at the value contrast there, that really surfaces up compared to other parts. And I'm assuming your main focal point is here, so you don't want those elements to detract from this area here. That's what I wrote down here, and that's pretty much it. So mostly I look at this painting with the, because when I saw the value thumbnail, I noticed the notation on the color temperature. I looked at this painting with the kind of idea of how you can enhance that the warmth in the light and the cool shadow. So that's what I looked at this painting with here. Very simplified, simple appearance of the figures. I think they worked out very nicely there without getting drawn into small details there. Okay. So yeah, again, I really liked your process of doing that. Something that I recommend to my students all the time too, especially when I give them at-home assignment when they have to use photo reference. I have them alternate scenarios or visual scenarios of these value thumbnails before they are allowed to proceed with the final painting on their canvas. It's always a great process there, okay? Yeah. Okay, it's Junior's painting. I think he mentioned about this was done in the Lee Radke's workshop or demo session there in honor of him. So great to remember Lee in this occasion there. Tough topic because dealing with a lot of reflections in the glasses and how to deal with object that is set behind the glasses. Sort of like the setup in the portrait session, how to deal with the eyes behind the eyeglasses and so on. So that's the photo reference he used there. Okay, over here. Again, that's a quite challenge. So basically you have to simplify a lot of things and you have to edit out a lot of information that was shown on the photo reference. So think about, okay, how necessary is that? Is it gonna cause more of a confusing situation by adding to that just because it's there? You know, should I include it or not? And of course, as we all do, squinting your eyes, that also help us to simplify things there. So basically any object behind the glasses, you have to be careful about the clarity of the image, how much clearly you like to indicate that. Obviously being behind the glasses, you like to diffuse the edges, not as detailed, not as descriptive and so on. Otherwise it can look like there's no glass, but you are looking at the mannequin straight on. So having that the less of sharp edges and so on, that help. Even the darks, that you have to be careful. That way, this dark in the frame of the store is different from this because one is like this here is straight visible to you versus this is behind the glasses. So you like to treat them differently, that they don't look the same between this and that as well. Now you can give some kind of reflection appearance to it as glass intentionally blur it. If you lay down with some strong sense of pigmentation, you can run some, what I do is I run with some dry brush and then intentionally distort or just give a little flick to it to, it's a little scary in a way because I spend so much time try to create the image of the mannequin or color and so on, but then now I have to destroy it. But sometimes that works out better in that sense. As far as these objects being black, and I think I'm going to be talking about it in later on. Somebody always says, "Oh, Dr. Holmes, the painting dealing with the black object under the light." You have to be careful that way. It doesn't turn out to be looking like the gray object, but rather black object that is receiving the light that carries some temperature. So when you add the white, just be careful that way it just doesn't turn into the grayer version of the black pigment there. So that's something you have to be careful about it. So I think the main thing here is how to handle the objects. Such a busy, so many things going on that is behind the glasses, and how you carry the appearance of the objects behind the glasses with reflections on top. So a lot of a selection and editing out process that's I find it necessary whenever you deal with the whether object or people behind the glasses or windows and storefront and so on. That's very interesting and fun and sometimes frustrating challenge, I find that to be. Yeah, so whether it be edges, details, and so on. So that's what I would like to watch out for. Okay. And this is Lori's painting, and this is her photo reference there. Okay. So let me see what I wrote down. Oh, yeah, I really like the textural appearance to it, especially all this foreground as opposed to foreground with very like transparent or very thinly painted. So texture alone, it really projects this main focal point forward. On top of that, of course, the intensity of these greens and so on, contrast against very grayness, the background that really help them stand out. And also I like the, I know it's partially in the photo reference too, but insertion of these some reds and so on, that really contrasts with the green and so on, so that it is not so much too much green dominated. So almost like a little bit of the spice in the background that kind of gets rid of the boring appearance, it can easily happen when you have so much green into that. Now, the sculpture-wise, the sculpture-wise, I would like to give usually. Let's take a look at the image here. Now, even if it's it may not show in the photo reference, I may like to give a slightly warmer temperature on the bottom part of it to indicate some warm reflect light bouncing off the ground there. I do that even the drawing, even if it may not show on the photo reference or even in the real setup, I may lighten up just a little bit at the bottom part of it to create a better sense of a roundness of that, as well as some sense of reflected light bouncing off of the warm ground. Now in the painting, I can do that with the value, but also I can just give some temperature shift, temperature change, a little warm temperature underneath of that that can help me not only create a sense of the round, the shape of the underside, but also sense of the temperature from the ground as well. So as opposed to having one single solid value, you can give some value shift or just at least give some temperature shift with some warm temperature. I think that'll help the sense of a little more the vibrance of the lights from the light source there. Okay, let me see what I wrote down. Okay. See, I wrote down some hard edges on the sculpture, but I don't really see much. So nice soft edges. Lori tend to, even other paintings, she tend to have very nice soft edges, edge to it. Even the hard object there, but in a way, because this is the man-made hard, stone object. In this case, if anything, I would selectively add some. When necessary, add some hard edges that balances against very nice soft edge. Probably this guy or right here, just a very small hard edges or at least form edges sneaked into that better balance against the soft edges, and also gives a more sense of a material of the hard stone as opposed to much softer tree appearance to it. And a little small thing here, but I would, just like the portraiture, I would be very careful about going with such a high key value within, especially in the eye socket and so on. So that should be the strongest light. So I would subdue those smaller the lights there, so that way they're a bit stronger there. Now from the photo reference, it looks like it's more of a cooler light as opposed to warmer. Sunny, bright, sunny light situation there. If that's the case, then it makes sense that she doesn't have a lot of influence of the yellow on the light side of that there. But that's something that, again, you have to experience what you felt and what you see under the real light there. Okay. Some of the dark values, I think I talked with Lori in another painting she did it way back. Just in outdoor painting, just be careful about very excessive dark there. Okay, that way it doesn't become too much more complete absence of light. I mean, it's absolutely necessary to indicate some darks. In fact, some of the paintings I'm going to talk about by some others later on, they were missing those. In that case, I would suggest that we need to put those down there. But just watch carefully, that way it's not doesn't turn out to be almost like deep dark black hole appearance to it, because outdoors there's always lights bouncing around amongst the object and so on, as opposed to much more control the environment of the studio when model is set, and especially in academic setting where the model is receiving one strong one-dimensional light. In outdoors there are lights bouncing all around, so just be careful about those things. So it's just a balancing act. Certainly punching in those deep darks are very important, but at the same time, just be careful about it. Now here, because I'm looking at the picture screen image, so those dark may not be as dark, so that might be the case, but something that it's good to keep in mind. Let's see what else I wrote down here. I think that's pretty much it. Now, Ray's painting. So this is his setup. Really, what size is that? It's really nice dynamic, the horizontal setup. So very bold topic that works nicely with that there. Maybe he, from the beginning, he intended to paint that elongated horizontal format. So maybe he took that out that day for that reason. But yeah, that's really strong there to indicate the bold composition with the elongated format there. And then on top of that, when there is frames like that, that really is nice, very unique, the composition here. And then also very strong sense of distance between foreground with a strong contrast of the values versus very faded appearance to it. So there's a good, because he's looking at very deep depth into that. So he certainly went for that and pushed for it, and he really got that indicated there. The one thing I noticed that is just be careful about the value difference between vertical plane that is receiving light like this way versus this horizon plane that is facing away, turned away from the light source. So I think you could have pushed the contrast a little deeper or stronger. So this is what I'm talking about here. Much big mass of deep dark against the very strong light receiving. So just watch out for the contrast, how strong this between this light and dark it is, so that the less contrast the value indicates more flatness to it, or it can appear that they belong to the same plane as opposed to here, 90-degree plane difference, 90-degree difference in the plane that receive the lights differently or not receiving at all in the downside plane there. So just watch out for those as well. So you can, if you like to keep this as a value, then perhaps you can intensify the value, or at least intensify the chroma there. That way, there's a clear sense of a different plane there. Again, I'm coming from much more fundamental aspect of the fundamentals of art aspect of it to indicate that. Let me see. Wait, what did I say? Oh, the signage here. Again, it's more of a the kind of things that in the fundamentals class there. Just watch out for, at least again, it's my preference. The writings in the landscape or urbanscape, they are such a strong presence. Whether one likes it or not, once you start writing on signage and so on, we tend to really zoom, the viewer tend to go right into that. So depending on how important that signage is, if the painting was done to promote that the establishment of some store, and then certainly you really like to write down very clearly, but you just have to be careful about how important that it is. Does it stand out too much right now, especially having the such a strong blue, and there is hardly any blue at all. It just happens to be, nothing wrong with it. So that really projected, and it's just your preference of how important that it is. It is very important, yes, go for it. But if it's not, you have to think about how should I write those things, maybe blur it down a little bit, maybe de-intensify a little bit, and so on. So that's something that you like to consider at least. Another thing here is when I first saw it and I was looking at to which direction the signage was, basically the perspective, and I'm about to talk about it. So if the signage is facing straight down towards you, then you go along with the perfect circle as you hear. But if it's turned around, then obviously it has to be slightly elliptical shape there. So that's something that you have to judge from your viewpoint, how you are positioned in relation to the signage, or how the signage is placed in relation to your viewpoint. Is this looking straight on or sideways and so on? And you have to act accordingly, whether it's going to be complete circle or slightly elliptical shape and so on. So basically, perspective of a circle that you have to deal with it. Another perspective here is, I don't know, I thought maybe it has and the painting almost like slightly inclining appearance toward like there's some hilly area. If it's the area that I know of, then I think it's more of a flat surface there. as opposed to having some, more hue. So it's just a matter of establishing your eye level and your vanishing point. And that's first thing I do whenever I paint, even still life, but also certainly when I paint outdoors. First thing I like to know is establishing my eye level and my station point. That way I know how much of an angle different the converging line should be. One may be more stiff than the other, and so on. So that's something that you like to kind of recheck whether that might be a little different than what it is there. Okay. People, and it's just a matter of, in this case, obviously, this is main focal point. So having the people, like having the cars, that's important to give that bustling appearance to it. A few things is, number one, you don't want to overdevelop, and certainly he didn't do that. And also the scale wise, that way, because how large, how you small make will affect the scale of this structure as well. So those are something that you have to be careful about it. Again, those darks, just be careful not to push too much opaque darknesses. So I can see this is much more transparent dark appearance to it, as opposed to a little too much black kind of dark. It's something that you like to watch out for. Okay. I'm sure there are some other things as well, but I think I can move on there. Yeah, nice painting. Yeah, here, good far distance atmospheric perspective appearance to it. Good. Oh, let me see. Let's. This one is Muriel. Okay. I've seen Muriel painting many of them, and then she has a very sweet palette. I think it's just a reflection of her personality of, how the painting and drawing sometimes that shows some personality. So she's got very, same with the edges and so on. She's got much more soft edges and so on. So whenever I see her paintings, I kind of relate to her personality with her color palette and soft edges and so on. She's got lots of variations of green, so she looks like she's got good command of mixing different greens in different greens, much bluish green, much warmer green, muted green, even purplish green, and so on. Very much like impressionistic color palette, like the purples in the shadow and so on. So as opposed to more localized colors for the trees being brown, the leaves being green and so on. We start off with that, but then she's bold enough and experienced enough to add those much more color temperatures in the shadow and so on, as well as the light and warmth and so on. So very much impressionistic painting that she created here. So a lot of the variations of green, I really like those there. And as I said, colors, the scheme is very uplifted. I like to call it a candy, in good sense, very candy, like the color, the sweet color palette that she has here. Very strong focal point, again, all these lines leading and warm color and so on. So there's no mistake that where she wants the viewer's eye lead up to, as opposed to much more softer, diffused edges and so on. So she firmly established that the focal point. And also usually where we put down the animated object, that's another principles you learn in the fundamentals class in the freshman year. That usually there are a number of things that you plug in to create a focal point. One of them is more animated object, like people, the animals, or as I said earlier, signage, lettering is another element that can add on to the creating the focal point there. So there's no doubt whatsoever where she really created a very strong focal point with a strong contrast and group of people, all these lines and so on. And so that worked out very nicely there. Let's see. Now, so she's got lots of the impressionistic, the colors there, but another way you can enhance the warmth would be by decreasing the chroma or the graying things down on the the shadow area. So the more you do that, by contrast, you can increase the warmth and intensity in the light area without necessarily doing anything on it. So basically working around it with low chroma and so on, that can enhance that even further. I would watch out for this dark seems a little to project in there. Maybe you can soften it or reduce the intensity of the contrast against the sky and so on. Now, for now, she kept the sky more of the flat appearance to it. So basically, the same color and so on. That can work nicely, very obtrusive, the value and the color. Or if she wanted to create a little more of a canopy appearance to the sky, then she could, like earlier, that the barn painting, I think was Lynette's painting. Was it having some gradated the color and the value between here and here? That would be something that optional thing that you could think about there. So that's it. But again, very nice and sweet and uplifting painting that I see often in her painting that she posts there. Very nice.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I see how nice and warm, the warm in the foreground. Okay, so next person is Steve. I'm assuming it's just small size. And
yeah, it's 11 by 14 down.
Oh, 11 by 14. Okay, wow. And then it's I understand it's a burlap, right, Steve?
Pardon me? Yeah, it's
Burlap.
burlap.
Yeah. First time I saw somebody painting burlap was in class. Ted's Mr. Speech, my painting teacher. He did that in the class. I forgot what, I think it's a landscape. And then he actually gestured in the burlap. He did a lot of fun stuff. He made his own paper with the glues from McDonald's napkin. And then he put the gesso on it and painted it. It's just a joy to see. He was in his 70s, but like you can see like sparkle of like 70-year-old kid playing with the toys and so on. So that's the first time I saw in the burlap. So I really like the texture. And also, I think because also the way he took a picture of it with some reflection, that really enhanced the texture of that. So I really like it. Now, I'm sure you guys all know that the strength of, among other things, that Steve's painting is very clean color and very strong composition, very based upon, years of fundamentals that also. And also, his is the case, the way I say it is because he spends so much years with the accurate in drawing and so on. So drawing doesn't really scream out, but it really supports the colors. So it's almost like he's got a strong wing so that he can fly whichever direction he likes to go. And really clean color, you can see very decisive strokes and the colors. I mean, just looks like just one or two very decisive stroke of it and lift it along there. Again, there's no doubt whatsoever as to the focal point with the strong value contrast, the intense color. And so these are the kind of a dark that doesn't look blackish dark we talked about earlier, but dark enough, but also almost like the transparent dark, same thing there. So those are absolutely necessary. It just have to be very careful so that it doesn't look like, just straight from the tube of ivory black and so on. And also, again, Steve, very, his style, very the colorful impressionist painting. So you can see there's purples and so on, spots of that. I love those things, that sneaking in that there, as opposed to just being all, dark green versus light green or just yellow green versus blue green and so on. But those colors, so they all sing. They kind of communicate each other and sing and so on. And see how simple it is. At the same time, it even though it's very much abstract and strong composition, but no doubt it has such a realism that again doesn't really come to so forefront, but everybody can see what it is there. And even the small things as having size difference between these and these, and that alone gives a sense of a perspective or flatness of the water and so on. I think he included the photo reference here. Yeah, there we go. So you can compare this and this. Okay. So even the choice of that among other places, you know, so there's not a whole lot of, let's say, very obvious, very eye-catching objects, a very intricate, detailed object, a simple thing, but that they're seen by someone who sees the composition and color and shapes and so on. So that's a delight to see really those things there. So I really love this painting, Steve, there.
Thank you, Don.
As far as texture is concerned, another thing that not as strong as the burlap is, you can paint on hemp. I'm sure you can get these easier. The hemp canvas these days with more relaxation of anniversary and so on. But I know in the 90s, a friend of mine, he ordered some canvas of all places, of course, from San Francisco, and it can order different texture grade, and it can give very close. If you order very heavier texture,
Yeah.
he gestured it, and I noticed that he has a really nice texture, almost close to the burlap.
Okay.
So,
I'll look
yeah.
that up.
Yeah, I forgot the store. It was years ago. So, but anyhow, but I really like the texture as well. Good, really lovely piece. All right, so this is the Kun Hong, Dr. Hong. I didn't know where it was. Where is it, Dr. Hong? It's at. But again, sort of like similar to Muriel, a lot of high chroma and strong color, the contrast and so on. Very strong composition whenever you see such a strong linear, linear line appearance to it. And of course, that's what you can use to direct the eyes wherever you like to create the focal point. So just be sure that those lines work towards your intended focal point, as opposed to leading somewhere else you may not have intended there. So that very warm, the light situation there. In fact, when I saw the photo reference, that was like stonework there. But again, that's the thing that I cannot say for sure what kind of the light situation during the time period, if he painted in the real life or photo reference, whatnot. Okay. So that's the photo reference for everybody to see what he had to deal with. So apparently, obviously, he added this to it. So that's a nice touch to give him more verticality in the foreground, and also that adds to leading the eye in the background there. And let me see what else I wrote down here. Okay, yeah, I liked also the balance of the elements between left and right, so that it's not too much shifted to one side with a one dark value in one area and the other side is still empty. So having that, they kind of counter each other, even this as well. So it has a nice balancing act, way I see it here. Few things here, something that I've talked about with Junior's piece earlier about dealing with the black object or gray object that is receiving. Just have to be careful that way it doesn't turn out to be looking like unintentionally the gray object, as opposed to it should be black object that is receiving whatever the light, whether warm and cool and so on. So obviously this kind of blackish object, very gray object, that's something you have to be careful about. What I do is I mean, I have no problem using black if I'm dealing with a black object, black signage, but not black car. But then instead of certainly we have to mix in the white to raise up the value, but I would sneak in some color, let's say mixing the color combination of some red and the blue. Could be a combination of, let's say, cobalt blue and terros, ultramarine blue and alizarin, and then adjust it that way it doesn't turn into completely purple. But depending on which side I prefer, whether the red side or cool side, I can control warmer light or cooler light and add those in while I'm mixing white to raise up the value there. That, again, we do not have the reference for this here, but these whites, I'm not sure, maybe too white, depending on, in other words, just like the black, you have to be careful about maintaining so much of the blackness turning to gray. Even the white object, depending on the light source, whether warm and cool, maybe add some color sense. Okay, that's what I can tell without having the photo reference in front of it there. And I wrote down, okay, color license. Oh, just watch out for small thing here, the tangency of the building between this guy here and that here. I know in the photo reference, they kind of match there. Then in that case, I may edit or alter it that way. It may go up or go down there. That way it doesn't create unnecessary tangency. Okay. Some people don't really, mind those things, but I tend to, especially in urbanscape, when there are so many different lines there is going to be some tangents happening. So you cannot avoid all the time, and you don't necessarily have to avoid all the time, but something that you may want to consider case by case there. This edge seems a little too hard considering that's far background there, and also this value seems to be very strong. Considering again far background, that is a kind of equivalent to this value there. So this almost communicates with this. So which means the more they closely communicate, the more bring them visually closer together. Even the greens between that here and that here, it has to do with your personal choice, as I said in the beginning of the session today. How much you like to push the sense of a depth between this and that. The more you like to create a sense of a depth, then you like to create things down here, intensify here, or less contrast, more contrast. And that's something that you like to consider there. Obviously, having such a soft edges, you clearly push back the trees nicely there, and also much warmer, intense color versus cooler, bluish color there. So that really sets nicely the sense of distance. If so, then you have to take a look at other parts, so that way the other parts also are consistent with the sense of a distance you created in some other parts as well, so they all work together in concert there. What else I wrote down there? Add clean muted colors, ground color. Yeah, and then again, as I said earlier, this considering what photo reference shows slightly warmer than it is, but I don't see that being any big problem there. And what else? The sky as well. The sky got very cooler temperature sky, and that's why this warmth really stands out there. And maybe we can give some warmth to it, mixing some other colors to make it warm, or certainly give it a good sense of gradation here between that part and that part there. Those are things I was looking at there. And same thing this here, just watch out for any excess dark so that it doesn't turn out to be overly too dark appearance to it. So those are the things that you like to give perhaps some warmer temperature in the bouncing. Anything that's facing the ground places that can be candidate for, you don't have to, but candidate for possibly giving some warmer temperature bouncing off of the ground floor, ground plane there. Okay. But again, very strong composition and very strong direction, and that elements of that three elements, I think they communicate very nicely, very similar, the theme, object, and what they are. So that's a very nice piece.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay. Now this one here, okay, it is a Yelena's painting there. So this is a photo reference that she shows there. So she really took it to very.
Hello.
Pardon me?
Hello, is this Selena?
Yes, yes. So this is a photo reference, and this there. So she took it quite of a. She got a lot out of what could be easily looking mundane object we see every day. So She put a lot of her own creativity to it, and very strong stylistic approach to it with the trees and so on. So let me see what I wrote down here. Yeah, I really like those dappled light effect, whether on the ground or the trees and so on. Now it's kind of a double-edged sword. It can give a very interesting, the light filtering through the trees and the leaves and so on. But you have to be also at the same time careful that way it doesn't end up break the larger shapes of the shadow. So it's just a matter of the balancing act as well as personal choice. How far would I tolerate that certain effect that's gonna be created by when I do go after certain other effect. In this case, that the interesting the light within the shadow, but then at the same time, okay, have to watch out for that it's not overly fracture the shapes of the larger patterns there. So one will be much more light oriented, the other one will be much more composition oriented by preserving larger shapes and so on. So again, there's the preference that so one can paint one painting in that way that maintains much larger shapes of the shadow versus larger shapes of light, but then turn around and paint another painting on another day, going after much more appearance stuff like she has it there. Okay. Just a break with the larger forms, and that's what I wrote down there. Oh, another thing I wrote here was, again, I'm going by the generalized photo reference here. Just watch out for the direction of the shadow. That way, part of that is a perspective. That way, the direction of the shadow, that doesn't create unnecessary or unintended sense of an inclining plane appearance to it. Whether that or these here, because I'm seeing the situation here is more of the flat surface ground here. So watch out for the angle or direction of the shadow. That way, it doesn't create unnecessarily as if there is a hill going up appearance to it. That's what right there. Careful about it. And again, it's more of the choice since you have such a strong texture and very vibrant color and value contrast there. Then you have to think about, okay, how you would like to treat the background, whether that's going to be very similar to this, and then they can kind of unintendedly merge together, versus you like to create much more softer the background. So if this is your main character, then maybe you like to treat them as more of an extra. That's something that, again, you like to consider that. I like the fact that you gave those little sky, the view, and some sky holes there, as opposed to, I mean, you could have extended the tree farther out, but I don't know. I like the fact that you indicated some the sky within it. That gives a more sense of the background in there. Okay. Again, these are the parts that what I was talking about. Watch out carefully about. Possibly they end up breaking the integrity of actually the tree at the expense of or in favor of creating those lights. So watch out for those darks where they may be a little too dark, or maybe you can give some warmer temperature, especially lower part of the tree, not necessarily the top, but any part that is coming closer to the lower, that is closer to the ground plane, is where you can exploit some warmer temperature to that. So that's one thing you like to think about. So those deep darks, very strategically laid down darks, really help those light part of the tree really stand out there. So very vibrant texture and then brush strokes in this painting. I really like that part of it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let me see who's next here. This is Sharon, and what I wrote down here is very strong color contrast. Clearly, you got very nice orange and yellow and the red, and this here sort of like what I said about the Lori's painting earlier. So they kind of keeps the painting from too boring in one all green or one all blue and so on. So in right dosages, they really work out nicely there. Let me see what else there. Same thing, similar thing I talked about earlier, just watch out for the dark, which is absolutely necessary, but the characteristics of the dark that way, you like to keep it relatively, especially in the shadow areas, more transparent dark, and it doesn't look like being completely devoid of the light surrounding area. So that's something you like to be careful about it. On the other hand, the tree here, obviously that is lighter in value because it's the light facing part of it. It just be careful that way it doesn't look too much of a white that dominates the sense of light. Perhaps you can add some more intense color, maybe slight mixture of the yellow or any other color that can make it not too white appearance to it. That's because the more white you add, there's always, not all the time, but always some risk of that can drop down the temperature to excessively there. So that's something you have to be careful about it. The texture on the peripheries of, peripheries of the leaves are really nice there. Very naturalistic appearance to it. I don't know what this red it is. In a way, I don't have to know. It's just, we don't have a photo reference here, but maybe some background and so on. It just be careful not to, the corners, some call it, corners can be really dangerous places where it can really suck the viewer's attention away from it there. So whenever it comes to the corner, just be careful not to overly develop or overly emphasize. I mean, there's always, you never say never. There are the compositions that divide exactly halfway and then somebody really come up with the masterpieces and so on. So there's no, this is always golden rule, but something that you like to consider that. Now, as some of the brushes, trees and leaves goes behind, just to watch out for the brush stroke size between ones in the front versus ones in the back. So you may want to go with a less brush stroke showing, or you may want to go with the smaller, more the unrecognizable brush strokes as opposed to front foreground. You can tolerate, or you can actually add those onto them more. So there, okay. So, I mean, no doubt there's a strong value contrast and color contrast that established that very strong, the center of interest there. Okay, and what else I wrote down there? Group the tree leaves. Oh, okay, that's another thing I wrote down there. About the trees, try to start off with grouping of the tree leaves, and then you clearly need to go back and separate them. That's where you have to be careful not to destroy that nice grouping that you have established in the beginning. So within it, you can have a light versus dark, warm versus cool, whatnot, but try to maintain general underlying sense of grouping the larger shapes all throughout. That's tough to do. I mean, I fail that all the time too, doing that properly there. So that's something that you like to be careful about it there. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Okay. And that's Clayton's piece, and you said you did in China, right? So he said it was a 16 by 20, larger size for 3 hours. But of course, Clayton has, his level of competency that is different from some of us there. So he can boldly approach that. And it has very much more like abstract quality to it, much more shape-oriented, color-oriented. So, I mean, it clearly shows very strong underlying sense of realism of it. This is a tree, this is in the steps, and this is background where, but just enough without forcing too much. But it's almost like the play of the shapes, play of the light and composition, geometric shapes, and so on, while still maintaining good sense of distance and so on. So having much more the muted, just abstract some sense of its shapes and so on versus very strong, the vigorous brush strokes and intense colors and foreground. foreground. So there's no doubt when somebody takes a look at it, oh, that's a tree and that must be the rail and then must be some background and so on, but without having to, for him to tell everything in detail or without me having to know everything in detail and so on. So that is obviously his main the main intention there. So in some places, you know, if that's the main the aspect of it, then you know you can do away with some of things much more traditional, much more fundamental, basic things that we are taught in art school in the beginning stage because of using the playing in the different level ground, so to speak. So maybe some of very hard edges that could be easily pointed out in the classes and so on. He maybe that may not be his main thing. So main thing here is here, and then again that kind of nice deep dark, but without being black. Those are absolutely necessary. That to me, I call it like the skeleton in anatomy. You gotta have a good skeleton for the muscles to attach it to. So I consider those muscles the light, but then you gotta have those skeletons or the framework of the building. So often the beginning students, they tend to not emphasize those darks enough because so we get so much interest in the colors and so on, which is very important, but you gotta have those, the framework of that. So very projecting appearance to it. Looks like relatively much of a cooler light he was facing because he painted on site, real under the real light that is, you know, no photo reference or match as we all know. So I'm assuming he was looking much more cooler light there as opposed to warmer light on the other side and so on. Okay, again, so very strong the geometry and the composition and design. I'm assuming, just assuming that that was his main the intention there. So play of those things there, while still, you know, sneaking in very intense colors there. So this guy's surrounded by intensity there. Really love those the shadows. So non-local color of the shadows gray, but they are so clean grays. The person, and I'm referring back to my teacher Ted. I mean, he's a great painter in so many ways, but one thing I am so amazed by him is his knowledge of sneaking in such a nice gray colors that really enhance such a the intense colors surrounding area. So it's almost like he doesn't have to buy fancy, expensive, high chroma paintings because he has such a knowledge on creating clean gray colors, and I'm seeing those things in his painting as well. That experience and knowledge of the clean gray colors, not muddy color. There's a huge difference between muddy color and the gray color. Just like there's huge difference between detail and accuracy there. So there's a clean gray colors that really enhances those warmer rich there. So nice piece, great piece there. Okay. All right, let's see who's so up to the Shannon was the one that I downloaded last night and wrote down some critiques on my notebook, and then after I talked with the Mary, I noticed she told me to download the other paintings that was not indicated as critics. So from here on is something I looked at early this morning. I downloaded and I looked at it again. So this is Patricia's painting under the air track. Is this a pastel, right, Patricia? Looks like pastel, right? Yeah. Okay. So very interesting. Yes, yes, you can see there. So very strong, huge, hardcover object that throws the shadow there. Looks like the shadow is not as dark from whenever the photo reference is taken, maybe because of the light bouncing off that, or maybe high exposure and took up the picture. So this shadow is not as dark as, let's say, what we saw in the Ray's painting there. So that's how what she ran with, so to speak. So you can take a look at it. You got a street scene, and also I'm not seeing a lot of people. Maybe it was Sunday morning, I don't know. But anyhow, so again, there's a very strong presence of this object of that entire part of it. So that's the part, seeing the photo reference that doesn't have what we generally may consider this to be much darker value, but it wasn't. So if she wanted to go with less of a contrast as opposed to making such a dark appearance to it, then I think that's just as good the choice as the darker value underneath of that one might have chose differently. So very bold the composition, very strong depth here. See how much of distance there it is. So very far distance she was dealing with, a long, very long distance there. And sort of like similar situation with the race painting, it really requires a lot of simplification. And that's exactly what she did. Instead of going after a lot of small details that might be there. Again, that's the balancing act. How much should I should I lay down on my painting to indicate that the sense of the city, bustling scenes of a city, like the very first painting Andrea did and so on. So that's her choice, where she liked to put an emphasis. If that was not emphasis, then that car or the person signage, then she can simplify it. If you're going to simplify, then maybe you can even gray things down further, particularly when you have this kind of the erase those here, clear those out. This kind of a yellows here, and then kind of a similar yellows here. Then again, it can have so much of a flat appearance to it, sort of like I talked about in Dr. Hong's painting about so much similar green in the foreground and in the foreground. They can kind of reduce the sense of the depth. And in this case, since you're dealing with such a long distance, deep depth, just watch out for they being so similar between this foreground and such a foreground area there. So that's something that we like to consider that. Let's see. As I said, the cars and people, that's the choice that she made. So she wanted to edit it out. So that's fine as well. Let's see what else there. Now this one, it's kind of a, can be, just because of the situation and the way, that can easily look like as if that's the sky, but as you saw there, that's a, well, there is a sky, wasn't it? Okay, I thought it was a building there. Okay, I see now. Okay, then I would say, even though in the picture there is more a gray appearance, that's why I thought it was gray building. When you have such a nice, more intense blue that indicates the sky, that being such gray, and that being such a close, almost like closer to above your head, then even though the photo reference shows otherwise, so it's got much more gray appearance to it. I might choose to, oops, sorry about that, choose the more color sense up here than the back there, so that that it clearly shows. Because that again, the reason I thought maybe some man-made structure, I was mistaken, was that because I was relating to these colors there. So they being so similar colors there, I thought there was also part of some sort of a bridge or something like that. So that's something that I might have done differently there. Again, a lot of things here, the things that you have to consider is the fact that you are dealing with a far distance. So anything that added on front versus here, always compare that way. You know, they are not so similar, where there be these legs here or these darks here. So see how this versus that, they all different. That gives a nicely receding appearance to it. So that's a good practice and challenge to deal with a very long the space in man-made structure there. Okay, nice the texture of some softness, and looks like she might have blended and so on. Nice pastel look there. Okay, let me see, my screen went dead here. Okay, so that's Patricia's, and this is Cindy, right? Yeah, Cindy's painting here. Okay, now what did I write down? Okay. Similar thing here, quite a distance, but then far distance is not shown much because of in photo reference a lot of tree leaves there, but nonetheless she had to deal with how to create a sense of the space and distance between here and here. So that's one of the main challenges there. And then I think she did quite well in that, clearly to give a sense that just enough suggestive sense that there must be foreground versus this is much more foreground there. Few things here. The tree, same thing here, similar thing here. Maybe it is, again, photo reference shows dark, but even here, maybe we can have some different values between here. Usually right below the leaves, an area, that's where we can go with a little darker value, as opposed to this down below is where we can give perhaps a little lighter value or warmer temperature. So watch out for value and temperature difference between this section versus this section right below the hanging tree leaves and so on. So that can be maybe made into dark shadow. So basically, check out the different segments, how different they may be. Sometimes even if they may not be, I may go in that way. I can sneak in some lighter value in some places, maybe warmer temperature and so on. The tree itself requires some good deal of study. It's challenging, but I love studying trees, especially drawings and so on. So how the leaves branches out, how the leaves the tree branches out, the tapers, and how they changes and so on. So that requires some good deal of study there. Good, nice kind of purplish, cooler temperature shadows. Instead of just making it dark, she resorted to some color temperature changes that in turn enhances warmer temperature. So the cooler she makes it, more color senses, then the warmer she can create without necessarily doing a lot about that area there. So that's a really nice treatment there. Now, I would like to think there is a little more contrast within the tree mass. So some darks versus light, maybe darks versus light. So the value seems to be kind of staying in, with the exception of this area, in same value range without perhaps little necessary contrast between light and dark. So that's something that you like to watch out for. So some deep darks versus light, even warmer light and so on. So the contrast of the values, but that I would like to push a little further into that. Okay. Let's see here. Good sense of depth, strong focal point. That's because of such a strong contrast of the values. So that creates a very strong focal point, and then create a sense of depth there. Cooler shadow and warm light. I don't see any issues with any the excessive hard edges. In fact, there are lots of nice soft edges. Everybody's different. Some tend to make a lot of more soft edges versus the hard edges and so on. You see, like the Muriel's painting, she tend to have lots of soft and edges and so on. I know it's a different object if it involves a lot of buildings, like Dr. Hong's the painting. He had lots of man-made structure that he had to deal with the hard edges, so he had to treat that. So Cindy, in your case, you had very nice soft-handed approach to come up with nice soft edges and so on. In that case, then you like to indicate some the form and the hard edges. So in the end, it's a matter of the balancing, rather than have to have all the soft edges, have to have all the hard edges, but where and what I am dealing with, and what's the focal points, a lot of other considerations that will help us to create a various degree of hard and soft edges there. So they look like you have very nice soft-handed approach with your brushes there. That's always a good thing to have. Okay. So that's about Cindy's painting and Maureen's painting here. Okay. When I took a look at it, I kind of remembered Dennis Miller Bunker's painting when after he came back from Europe studying there and came in, and he got influenced by a lot of the Impressionist painting, even in Europe, and then some of his paintings, because he painted a lot of the scene outdoors and the very strong. He painted a lot of flowers and very Impressionist painting, very pushing the colors both in the light and shadow and so on. So when I see pencil, is running out of battery. Like the purplish colors for ground. She had a photo reference, a little small photo reference here, but I can share it with you. So this is her photo reference here. So clearly this ground is not purple, but doesn't matter. She chose to go with much more, again, the color palette similar to impressionistic, color palette. So and she really worked with the colors there. So I really like that appearance there. And I mean, you cannot get any intense than that there. So that kind of balances against us. So they are not same intensity, but that is, so this is a main character. This is maybe supporting character. Anyhow, so that, this is a kind of the dark I really like. Again, it's not really, say, black kind of dark. You can have a like transparent appearance to it. And also it's very not so confining, like such a nice square, hard edges and so on, but more abstract appearance to it, like kind of a dark you saw on Steve Patricia's painting as well. And very small doses, same here. This is not really blackish dark, but very transparent dark. So they really anchors paintings there in small dosages. So they are, I like those creating this. In fact, I start off with those transparent darks in the very beginning. Start off with those, and as I said, I use that as skeleton to build the lights on top or around surrounding areas there. What else I wrote down here? Colors that looks very clean. I don't see any, I mean, muddy colors and so on there. So I like that as well. Very soft edge treatments. Obviously, she's dealing with a lot of objects that's from the nature, like the flower, trees, and so on. So that makes sense to have lots of soft edges there. Now this, I think it was a stone work, so maybe they can have a slightly firmer edge, not necessarily hard, but some firm edges there. So in this case, in a way, the balance happening here is not only these two amongst themselves, but intensity of the color balances against this intensity of the dark value. That kind of sets up the frame, and then after that, she's got all these lights there. I really like this kind of diffused appearance, as if light is coming right through it there. That really worked out very nicely there. Okay, so yeah, it's I really like it. Intensity of the color, and then dark values, and so on, soft edges, and so on. One thing here is the color between this and the background seems a little too similar. I don't know what the photo reference shows there. So that part, I would probably like to give some more color senses as opposed to very strong value senses, very high key values. So you can still maintain high key values, but just enough so that it's not so similar to that. So that's the only thing that I might consider doing it there. Okay. Let's see. So that's Maureen's. This is Linda's painting.
Thank you, Don.
Oh, you're welcome. Linda, now this is one of those things that it doesn't have any, glaring, very iconic images, very interesting things, sculptures and so on. But there are a lot of things that you can delve into. So it does require some courage to choose that spot to paint, while let's say others all go for, the bean or the lion in the Art Institute, very iconic, very easily recognizable images. And so I keep saying about my old teacher, Ted, but that's one time I went out painting with Ted with some friends, and we're painting the river by the Des Plaines River, and we are looking for some very interesting stuff. And he chose one corner of the bottom of the tree, and then he comes up with a brilliant painting. And then if you take a look at it, it's nothing but just trees and some leaves and so on. But because he has such a good sense of composition, all the years of decades of experience, he come up with a much more interesting painting than somebody painted Eiffel Tower or the very obvious paintings there. So it does require some experience and courage to choose what seems to be very mundane object. And I think this is the case there. She chose the topic that may not really stand out to others, but then you can do a lot with it. So that's one thing. Yeah, good sense of the sky above and sky looked into, basically far ground there. Let's see, we talked about some the study of the trees that we can do more to get to know better about the trees. As far as the tree, this underlying structure is concerned, I find that winter time or early spring is the best time because that's when all the leaves are not there. Then of course these days is a really good time to study the mass of the trees, the mass formations of tree leaves and so on. So that's something that we can all study further. Similar thing with the earlier with the Cindy's painting about the trees. Watch out for different values and colors depending on what part of the tree that it is, whether lower to the ground or under the tree, the leaves, lumps of the trees versus in the middle of it and so on. That's something that you like to see whether there's some any room for differentiating them. The light on the ground here, I think we can use a little more mixture of the yellow into that and the sparkling, dappling lights, these areas there. Okay, so clearly in the shadow area, we can go with a darker value and more blue-oriented green versus in the light area, we can go with clearly lighter value, but also more the warmer temperature indicated that that's something that you may want to consider. And also these kind of appearance of the suggested appearance of texture of that. The way I do it is once I lay it on the color, I go back on top with some dry brush and especially like soft hair brush. It doesn't have to be, but I give a slight gentle flick of that to let the light area, which is heavier in load of painting, and give it some flick into the shadow area to give a more naturalistic appearance of the grass and the tree leaves and so on. That can be done also in other places as well. Okay. Let's see. So, what else I wrote down here? Oh, let's see. Okay. Add some non-local. Oh, that's one thing. Sort of like I forgot whose painting was. Maybe we can add some non-local colors within the darks of the trees and so on. So we can start off with darker green, but then maybe, especially if it's wet, it is the oil painting, right? Yeah. And then we can brush in some non-local colors of sort of like what Steve did with some purples and so on to give some color variation so that it's not just darker green for the shadow versus light green for the light, but some cooler temperature in the shadow on top of the darker green and the warmer temperature on the light side of the green there and so on. That'll give a little more more variation and more sparkle into that. I don't know, that's the right expression there. So basically some non-local colors, but go for some temperature shifts on top of the proper value is most important. So you did it right, no doubt about it, to give the convincing darker value, but then we can add additional element to that by adding non-local colors, whether it be the leaves, the brushes, or the trees, and we can do that as well. Again, as long as the value belongs there. So that would be the case there. Okay. Let's see, next person is Julie. Okay, what did I? Very idyllic scene. I like this guy kayaking or canoeing there. Okay. Let's see what I wrote down there. Yeah, very idyllic scene here. Good, very large sky that sets the mood for the light situation. So having such a large sky that gives a good sense of how the lights down below should be. Now on the photo reference, when I saw that, it's quite a more intense blue into that. So I don't know whether she chose to intentionally do that. So it could be the choice. And this is the case, I forgot whose painting earlier was, but not only gradation and value, but color between here and here, you got a little more like mixture of the alizarin crimson type appearance to it. So that's something that she could have tried, but maybe she chose to just go with a simple flatness of the sky as opposed to giving more the blueness of the sky to it. Now here is the part that looking at the photo reference between the foreground across the pond or the lake versus the foreground. So you like to think about, okay, where should I focus on as far as creating the focal point and so on. So that will kind of dictate you to choose different value contrast and color, the chroma concentration there. So that's just your choice. You may choose to focus more on the foreground, then you have to go with more stronger contrast of the value, more intense color detail, versus if you have chosen the background, then it is reversed. It looks like you have chosen more of focal point being here, not so much of the foreground, because there is the color contrast, the value contrast is not strong there. And again, anytime you have the person or animals, that always draws the viewer's eye into that. So I am assuming that's where you like to place the center of interest, right around here, which means that makes sense to have a stronger value contrast, even though the shape is smaller and space is farther away. But you can create a focal point in the foreground as opposed to foreground. It doesn't always have to, focal point doesn't have to be always in the foreground there. So that's that. Just watch out for the edges of any object, in this case, these brushes and trees of that way. You like to have a convincing overlapping as opposed to coming to very kind of teasing tangents in there. So that's something that you like to create. I like this kind of grayish green appearance to it. So it's not just a same blue-green, but it looks like she has lots of a mixture of some red family into that. So having that gives a little more kind of like diet, having some nice meat and some vegetables and potatoes, whatnot. I don't know. But anyhow, I like to think of it that way instead of just consuming the same thing, having some differences even here, there. So that gives much more variety to that. Okay. So
Don, this is Mary. We're a little over time than what we had thought. This is phenomenal. So are you okay to continue going?
Let me see. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I got 10 more. Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay, so everybody, this will be recorded if you have to leave, but we'll just keep going. So thank you very much, Don.
You sure want to record me? I'm not sure about that.
You're recorded.
Oh, you got me this time.
Not only that, more people have come on, so.
All right.
Yeah.
You know how I feel about the
Okay, so you're getting rave reviews, so keep going.
I don't know. Anyhow, that is that. Let's see. Yes. Okay. Okay, so that's Julie. And this is Jean. I think I read in her Facebook post because there are so many mosquitoes, she had to kind of cut it very short. So it just, it's a matter of she didn't have enough time to develop further. That's all. I guess she could agree that she didn't get to quite finish because of the insects, mosquitoes there. So let's see. No, there's no photo reference there. So again, this is again, she so far added more about what I call the skeletons there. So next stage would be building it up. Now, because this is a watercolor, right, Jane? In this case, then in some places you may, unless you like to paint opaquely, you may have to kind of wipe out, because as you know, watercolor, you really have to save the light area, unlike the old painting, you can add on to that. So that's something that you just have to be careful about, not exhausting the light. Or so that's the case there. So just be careful about the too dark values, strong contrast in the background as it goes backwards there. But anyhow, it just looks like she just it is more of a beginning stage that before she move on to the next stage. So unfortunate that after she established a nice frame, she couldn't get any further with that because there's so many mosquitoes there. Now that's Mary's. Mary, what size is this?
It's a 6x6.
Okay, that I kind of thought because I'm looking at the brush strokes and lack of detail. So again, that's why, as I said in the beginning, knowing the size, that helps, because that way I don't, mistakenly giving the advice or the suggestion that is not quite appropriate for the small studies and so on. So I'm assuming this is could be more of a study or just smaller piece you're doing it there?
Yep, just a little study. It was about a, I don't know, 30 minutes or so.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. Oh, same thing here. That means again, these dogs are absolutely necessary to have it. Just watch out for that. It's not too opaque dark, especially in the beginning stage. You like to start off with more transparent dark there. So it's absolutely necessary. Just watch out for the opacity of it and the impasto to that. Now, because it's a study, in a way, it's not as important as it finishes the painting, because when you do study, you just like to see the relationship of light against dark and so on. And here's the photo reference she had it there. So that's the dark that, in fact, if anything, I would establish those darks from the very beginning, and I'm going to build this surrounding area on top of that and so on there. And I really like the boldness of this going with these colors there. Okay, again, kind of a non-local color, but tried it out, and then after that, watch out whether it has to be shifted in the value or the temperature and so on. Now, this is a case that lots of intense colors, but so you can help intense colors by support of the non-intense colors or gray colors. So by sneaking in some gray mixture, gray colors some places, then you can actually make them look more intense, or you don't even have to make them intense themselves, but visually make them look intense. So as opposed to creating the intensity of the color, we are going after making them look intense in those colors there. So that's the color there. So basically, I got lots of intense colors, but which is necessary. But let's see if we can work with its opposing color to help that. Just a little bit of the strokes and so on. Not much, but just little flicks of that. That gives more than enough sense of what she's dealing with there. And clearly, you can see this area is grayer, and it's got more in the less chroma, which is grayer, and also influence of the mixture of the white there. So that certainly separates that from here. So then in itself gives a sense of a distance between here and here, which in her case, unlike those L tracks and so on, she's not dealing with a lot of distance between here and here, but just having that, the difference in chroma between here and here and warmer temperature, then in itself gives a more than enough sense of a receding area there. So that worked out very nice. So this is a really nice, sweet studies there. So something that not just landscape painting, I do that also smaller, like the figure studies and so on, little small sketch, 6x8 or 5x7, doing lots of them, really helps. So something I recommend to the painting students a lot there. So very good. It's very useful, doing a lot of those things there. Keeping it simple, because again, think about why you are doing this. This is not about coming up with a brilliant painting that you can you frame and sell it and so on. Nothing wrong with that, but at the same time, what's your the goal that you have given yourself, and sometimes you just stop right there, even though you can go further with the details. And sometimes you kind of have to they resist that temptation as well. But in itself, just looks very nice there. Okay. And this is Bobby's painting there. So let me see, what did I write down here? Very interesting view looking down. In other words, she was facing or focusing more on the surface. She's looking down, straight down. And I mentioned earlier Dennis Miller Bunker. One of my favorite paintings that he did, it was a kind of little small creek going around. He's looking down and then loading up with the colors and textures, very much impressionistic style as opposed to what he used to do when he was studying in Europe. And really showing the reflection of the sky within the stream and so on. That itself was such a lovely piece that I remember there. And
could you say who that was again?
It's a Dennis Miller Bunker. He turned into more impressionist painting during his later stage of life, which is kind of ironic, tragically ironic, because he died when he was 29. I think, if I'm not mistaken, when he died, John Singer Sargent was maybe pallbearer or came to funeral. He said once that he considered Dennis Miller Bunker the most promising young painter of the time, but he died suddenly a few weeks after his marriage, his wedding, from heart condition. Very tragic. I love his paintings, and but again, didn't get to produce any more. Very direct approach, so there's no mushing around and so on, so you can clearly see the strokes right as they are without going back and forth and so on. So it gives much more of the fresh appearance to it. And very color oriented. In other words, it's not so much about the good sense of a structure, sense of solidity. Obviously, she's dealing with purely visual appearance on the reflection, as opposed to building these buildings standing up upright right here, then different story. But she's just totally dealing with the visual appearance, basically painting what she sees on the mirror. So as opposed to going after those the sense of a structure and so on, dark values and so on. So that worked out very nicely there. The thing here is, I think I talked about it in the Steve's painting about those different thinness of the line, okay, giving a sense of a distance, like the lily pond and so on. In that case, also I might, if I were to do it, give some horizontal brush strokes there, okay, to give the sense of this is the water this way. Otherwise, this can mistakenly look like a tree standing up, this appearance to it, as opposed to it is on the flat surface there. So that's the only thing. And the same thing, since she has such a thickness of painting, and sometimes it's not necessary to go back with the paint. It's just a clean brush, dry brush, and then just flick it sideways. And when you do that, go with the smallest stroke versus larger stroke and larger stroke. That might do that to the job there. Okay. So very simplistic, very study-oriented, the painting there, like color study or the compositional study there, and good, interesting viewpoint of the looking down the pond as opposed to actually going after physical structure of the trees or buildings and so on. I like doing this, what's that, the pond in the Lincoln Park, the rookery. Have you repainted in that area? That's really nice.
Yeah.
Alfred, I forgot the name of it, the garden of the pond, the lily pond there.
Lurie.
Lurie, is that what it is?
And we've
Yeah.
had, I think, 3 paintouts there that have
Caldwell Gardens.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's, I went there a number of times to draw and paint there, really nice area there. So it kind of reminds me looking down the pond with the lilies there. Very lovely, okay. All right, oh, that's the, there, she focused on this area there, right there, okay. Okay, now this is Sandra, right? Yeah, Sandra. Now I know where it is, right on the off the Chicago Air Station. So I'm assuming this is part of the train station, or maybe not. I don't know. But anyhow, the paper source building there. I thought about going out in front to the sketch because it's got a lot of interesting architectural elements to it, and I love the sketching those things there. At the same time, it can be quite complicated, kind of a lot of things happening there. Okay. So that's what, again, if I were to paint, I may want to go out for the drawing session for myself first, and then, so anyhow, so a few things here. She's got very vibrant color scheme of the red and the greens and so on there. The same thing as well, so very colorful painting there. Good sense of a sky, canopy apparent the sky between here and here. Basically, this is far away, this is closer to above my head, so tend to be more intense color. Again, basic principles in the landscape painting and painting the sky there, so she established that. Few things here, more of a drawing aspect of it. It's just something that whenever you're dealing with architecture, we just come to scrutiny of the perspective. The trees and grass, it's not as obvious, but whenever we're dealing with the architectural subject, then like it or not, or fair or not, it just comes forward. Just like the anatomy comes forward whenever you deal with the figure painting, figure drawing there. It just that's how it is. So it's something that we have to be a little more careful about it as far as perspective. It doesn't have to be detailed, accurate perspective, like working on with a T-square and so on, but convincing, plausible perspective that we have to work out a little more carefully. Those like vanishing point and converging lines and so on. That way, it doesn't give either we are dealing with the inclining plane, or this painting was done from your eye level being way high up there. So again, it's just not so much a matter of the painting, but the principles of perspective to be a little more careful in that case there. And also, as you can see in the photo reference, there lots of detail, even the architecture itself. So that's where we have to really push ourselves to keep things simple and going through the decision process of, okay, what is more important, what is necessary, what is maybe necessary, what is totally unnecessary, in fact, what can be harmful. So that's the process you have to go through. That way, they don't end up creating the situation that you didn't intend to, or end up creating confusing appearance to it, and so on. At the same time, if you just like to have fun with it, then, you like to create a lot of detail, and I don't see anything wrong with it. So again, it depending on what your intent in the beginning of it, that way that can help you decide, okay, what should I include and what should I not include there. Similar topic of a selection process. Again, if this is not that important in contributing to the entire picture, then I may choose to take out there. That will be my choice there. The shadow, just have to be careful for a couple of reasons. Number one, so that it doesn't look too much more of a black appearance to it. And then shadow, you have to be careful about the textures and brush strokes or the imposters and so on. You like to usually, general rule of thumb, again, you never say never, but general rule of thumb is that you don't want to emphasize the brush strokes, the textures, the imposters on the shadow area, unless, that's the part of the scheme, story of the painting, then different story. That's why I say, it's not, written in stone all the time, but something that you have to be careful, because when you do that, it can look like, instead of being sensible air of the shadow, it can look like there's a tangible object that is crawling under surface and so on. So that's something that you have to be careful about. I'm assuming that's the shadow there. So even the photo reference, I can see a lot of blue color into that. So keep it simple and make it as the flat in terms of it doesn't have such a textures and brush strokes and so on there. Okay, and again, just coming back to it, just watch out for the detail, what is necessary and what is not necessary. Not only that, the more we tend to spend more time, effort in the detail, then obviously we're gonna have a less room for other things that may be more important, like the composition, color, cleanness, drawing aspect, perspective, and so on. Okay. So it's a quite tough topic, but very fun subject and fun way you treated it there, I have to say. Yeah, good. clearly very vibrant color scheme, that blue sky to the green to the red and so on. Yeah. And this is Robin's painting. That's the crow looks like. That's the photo reference. Oh, okay. Yeah, this is a case that at first I missed a couple of photo references. So this is, I'm sorry. So this is her painting. You saw the photo reference there. When I uploaded, the 2 paintings escaped this. I have to reload it until they ended up being in the far back. So, yeah, very interesting painting. I mean, the crow. So a few things here. Very interesting topic with the crow, and looks like it's a high elevation. The viewer is looking up. So kind of opposite of what Bobby did with looking down on the pond there. So that's that aspect of it. And the texture, a lot of heavy texture. Is it texture of the paint or yeah, it's a texture of the paint, right? But this looks like texture of the surface.
Painting underneath.
Painting underneath. Okay, yeah. Sometimes, as you know, that gives a very interesting appearance to it. So I really like that. So you got the texture from the painting itself, and then underneath of that. So that's yeah. It gives much more visceral appearance to the painting itself there. So, and one of the most striking to me is the really, really warm temperature against the cool temperature, like purplish temperature. This is a case that shadow is not really dark, but in a way it doesn't have to be, because basically she's betting on the color temperature to indicate the shadow and the light, as opposed to value difference of the light against the shadow, which is much more traditional way of it. And I think she worked that just right. So even here, the temperature is not, she went along with a little more grade purple, as opposed to a little more intense purple, like how I think the Muriel, she worked out much more closer to impressionistic, more intense, the color scheme, but also created a good sense of temperature. But her case, she still did that similar principle, but more grade, and the value itself is not dark, but because of a warmth of the light, it really works very nicely as a nice good shadow there. I also like the texture of the cloud here as well. At the same time, the cloud far background has less texture. So having stronger texture, less texture, immediately gives the sense that is farther away on the sky versus that is closer. This sky is closer to me, that appearance to it. And that the soft edge of it, I don't think in the photo reference is there, but you know, it doesn't matter. I think that soft edge appearance worked out very nicely again to enhance the sense of depth. Here, it's almost like unfinished appearance to it, but because of that, that gives much more finished appearance to it. So that's the case that the way you can intensify that will be by de-intensifying or unfinished appearance to it. So that really makes, so that will be the main focal point. You can say main leading characters, that may be the secondary characters or supporting cast there. What did I write down here? Robin, okay. Warm temperature in the rocks. The water, we saw a little bit of trickling on the photo reference, but it's really tough to do that. So I don't know. And the photo reference just has very little water to it. So if the water is very important, I would definitely see why you did it, but you have to think about how important that it is. Maybe either reduce it or maybe not doing it. So that would be the choice that I might have thought about it if I was painting this painting here. Another thing here is oh, my pencil is running out of the battery. The crow itself, if I were to do it, I might have gone with a little darker value on the shadow side, or like the belly area and so on. So basically, that being right on top of a main focal point of the rocks and so on, I may be maybe I would choose to be a little bold with a stronger value, especially on the side of that, to go right hand in hand with the rock that it is sitting on, which is always a focal point. So that way, the values on the crow is not so similar to the background. So I may want to make the crow a little more prominent appearance to it. Again, that will be just my choice there, because I think it's very interesting to have that you painted the crow there. So if that's the case, then I may push a little further with that there. Okay. So that the case is there. Again, the texture worked out very nicely with the texture of the rock, very ruggedness to it. Okay. So let's go back to what was that after. Yeah, that was there. So this is what I meant by this water that she was going after there. And again, she didn't have that there, but then I think the way she treated that little vegetation appearance to it actually worked out nicely there. Next person is,
Thank you, Don.
well, you're welcome. Rich. Rich, I'm assuming it's a relatively small piece, is it not? Okay. Oh, he's not here. Yeah, it's just very clear division of the shapes. Okay, so I see larger shape here. It boils down to these three shapes here: the sky, foreground, maybe mountains, and foreground, and so on. So very clear-cut division of it. Now, to me, the challenge there is how you maintain all throughout. That way, when you do have to do small things there, they still belong in there, and then they don't end up disturbing or fracturing that the nice shape it has established. The blueness really nice works out to really push the foreground there appearance to it. On the other hand, those not only lighter value and strong contrast, but also texture of the brushstrokes really make them really project. So, I mean, it doesn't have a lot of detail, which is not necessary, but there's no doubt this may be a little building. Again, it doesn't have to be, but very simplistic. Even the sky, is a slight separation between here and here that just gives enough sense of a canopy up there in the sky there. So that without any much detail, is a very clear-cut, strong piece, soft edges. And the colors are clean. It's not muddy because it looks like he just laid things down and then left it alone there. So really nice small gem of a painting. I really like it. Okay. And next person is Dina. You see, so here's her photo reference. So she focused on that area minus the tree. Very dynamic, the cloud formation, and she went for that. So even though clearly that is focal point, largest segment is all this vast, the sky and cloud formation there. Okay, so that's quite kind of a good boldness, guts to tackle on that aspect of it. Very convincing sky, no doubt about it. And then also even these lines clearly leads to main focal point, those objects there. Few things here. As far as the sky, the dark versus dark, I would probably indicate a little darker values for the shadow part of sky in the back. And basically what I'm saying is maybe you can reverse it. Basically that way that'll give a stronger contrast between light against the darker dark, and less contrast between not as light and not as dark there. That works nice. I mean, clearly having the size difference and also texture difference, she already established a good sense of vast sky distance there. But that will even enhance even more if the darker values are placed more. I'm showing the actual photo reference that might not be the case, but I might have chosen to edit it in that way just to make it fit for what I'm trying to do there. Now, these here greens, I would probably gone with a little less intense green, or even like what Rich did, more it's like green, the bluish green, to push the sense of distance, sort of like compared against this green that way. That's sufficiently different from here by pushing this. Even if you like to work more impressionist way, then more like a purplish, dark purple color there. There's that. Now those little nice touch of little slightly kind of small spikes to give a far distance texture appearance to it. Okay, very severe texture in the foreground to again help and as well, and then also very imposter paint to give very strong foreground appearance to it. So, and what else? Okay, yeah. So. Yeah, so there's no kind of two aspects. One is really good, the sense of a wide open space by opening up the sky, but also good sense of a focal point, very strong linear perspective that leads the viewer's eye into that there. One of those, I might want to soften the edge even further, avoid more linear line appearance to it. So even out of those three, it looks like this guy is going to be the main focus there, but it's not anything big there. But yeah, I like the good sense about atmosphere and open land, the sense that it looks like you observed there. So very good, very nice. Yeah. Now next person is Stephen. So it's very much more drawing oriented. I think she used acrylic paint and colored pencil and so on. So a lot of linear, the line medium, which makes sense because the looks like he's dealing with a lot of line. Oh, there's a photo reference here. So this is what he was dealing with here. So having to deal with all this line, so choice of the colored pencil and acrylic, that makes sense there. So a lot of small details, and which makes sense because clearly this is focal point. You can really indulge yourself with those details, lines, textures, and so on. It shows good the sense of a draftsmanship on his part there, and the focal point. On the other hand, the background can clearly see a very diffused appearance to it. So all these nicely stays back and without trying to compete against the focal point there. Now on the photo reference, it has lots of green into it. So I guess he's consciously chose to alter it. So these greens and so on, okay, without making it too intense there. So unlike the photo reference, it has more of the red tint appearance to it. So I'm assuming there is a conscious choice to do that. Now that area having that's the strongest contrast between light versus dark in the entire painting. So no doubt the focal point draws right onto that. So that's a very simple but yet effective tool to create that with hard edges, strongest contrast and so on. But then everything else kind of diffuses, especially the background, skies and so on. So it looks like he had a lot of fun doing this there. Yeah, okay. Let's see. That's what I saw there. Okay, and this was Richard. So he's, oh, again, I lost the photo. That's his photo reference here. And so he edited out and altered it the way it fits there. So very strong value contrast without overly too deep dark or too light there. So I'm talking about places like this there. So having that contrast gives immediately a sense that this is vertical plane away from the light source, and this is a horizontal plane there. So that immediately kind of he worked out the topography of the land mass from the beginning. Looks like very clearly set things up there, and very warm light here, and here's clearly the sky. So clearly this rules the entire painting there, but then it's got nice supporting elements that sets within its place there. Even here, I'm detecting a little more like the dark purplish color there that works nicely, I guess, as a shadow. And also because of that, that enhances the warmth of that. The cooler you make those shadows, obviously that's gonna make that area very warm there. Let's see. Sky and water seems, the way I see it is I'm looking at the sky and water here. And when I compare that, that seems to be much like the cooler, grayer day, or even like the evening hours, because a lot of blueness to it, as opposed to this area seems to be like very warmer day, like afternoon hours and so on. But at the same time, so at first I got a little confused by that, but at the same time, out in the ocean, you know, the far ground may be, you know, so far away, so that is about to come closer to it. So basically, background may be very like the cloudy day. Now the cloud is moving on, so that might be the case. So it's hard to predict, especially like the ocean areas and so on. I like to go to Pacific Northwest to do the paint there, and then sometimes things don't look like they're gonna make sense if I paint the way I saw it there. But so this might be the case there. Okay. Now this area here probably like to have a little more of a soft edges and more of a almost like broken up appearance to it to suggest that breaking the waves and so on, as opposed to a little too clear cut, clean boundary between rocks and edges there. So that's the only thing I say there.
Good suggestion.
Yeah, but yeah, I really like the warmth of that, even the small hard edges and so on. So that really, and then this guy nicely sits back a little bit, so it does just enough of a supporting actress or actor role playing there. So very nice there, particularly this part. Okay, very good. I like that. Very good. All right, so I'm losing my battery in my Apple Pencil and losing my voice. Let's see, Richard, and this is Christine. Okay, so this is her photo reference there. Okay, now clearly, because she went along with a very cooler purplish, the shadow or the deep dark against very warm yellow. So very striking color temperature, even here, between this and that. So very warm sense of light there. Again, very more impressionistic appearance to it. And take a look at it here. So between, so this here in the photo reference, obviously just a darker value. It doesn't, being a photo reference doesn't show actually clear sense of a color temperature, but she didn't just copy that, but she chose to go with much more color sense to it, color sense. Same with the light area. Well, light is actually quite warm in the, even in the photo reference. I'm talking about this area here. So in her case, she didn't modify a lot from photo reference on the light area because she carried that very warm yellowish light. It's just her modification of the shadow into much more cooler purplish instead of just relying on simply a darker value. That really gives a good sense of a warmer temperature, same thing as well. Okay, now again, these kind of darks, I really like it. And again, I lay down those darks first, and then I would build up the trees surrounding or on top of that. Okay, same thing here. The only thing here is it's almost like partially, this part of the painting is kind of a different painting from this area here. So this one has closer to more of a traditional painting that relies on darker value versus lighter value to indicate the light and dark, versus this one has more cooler temperature versus warmer temperature to indicate the light and dark there. So it sounds a little odd, but it's almost like slightly disconnect in style between this part and this part. They worked out very nicely, but this one belongs to, seems to be more of a traditional approach of the landscape painting, versus this one is more impressionistic approach in the landscaping appearance to it. So they worked out very nicely on their own. It's a slight different, almost like slight disconnect between those two elements there. That's one thing I sense there. Now here, the tree here, if I were to disappear, if I were to treat that here, I would indicate some darker values, maybe not as dark, but so basically that tree kind of hangs down without some sense of a weight to that, because that's what's happening in this tree here. There's the leaves and so on, some sense of weight and darks and so on. So without getting overly dark, I may want to sneak in some spots of the darks to show some suggestive appearance of the window dark or darker part of the tree leaves versus lighter part of the tree leaves and so on. But again, the most striking thing that I really like here is that the sense of a light she created using temperature. Take a look at this purplish color there. So that certainly is not the local the color for the shadow, but works so nicely. So that's why that gives a very warm sense to it. You can imagine if you replace this with, let's say, dark brown, then it'll still work as a shadow, but that's not gonna make this light area so warm in temperature there. So that's a good way to think about it. All right.
Thank you, Don.
I think that's it. Wait. So I hope that was any helpful. Again, it's not a very short time, and I'm sure I missed some things out here, and then I'm sure some of the things you disagree and whatnot. So please take it with some grain of salt and some more subjective aspect of it. I just wanted to focus more on generalized, broad fundamentals as opposed to too much of a one stylistic approach. So I hope that was the case there.
Don, we've had many notes about what a great critique this was. First of all, I have to congratulate you on your use of whatever it is you're using for annotation, being able to show us so many different points in the painting. So you are quite facile and amazing annotation ability. But thank you so much. Thanks for going the whole distance with these. There's just so much here that's really wonderful. And seriously, several people have sent, they're asking about your teaching. Are you doing some teaching coming up?
Oh, actually, I'm teaching at the Academy online for some students who chose to take the semester. It's a challenge, I tell you, to try to teach a painting class online. I'm trying to learn how to video myself. I'm not a good person in front of the cameras, and then it's a challenge. In fact, there's some other teachers teaching during the summer, and he said he's almost spending 3 times more trying to teach online than he was usually teaching in the studio. I'm not sure about 3 times more, but I can totally understand where it's coming from, because I'm spending actually more time preparing my material newly, and because I had all these materials in the past classes, but I have to redo that, recreate it, take photographs and so on. So I don't have any personal private class teaching online. I'm hoping that when things get safe and settled down, I'll go back to teaching portrait drawing class in my studio at the Fine Arts Building. Building is slowly opening it up, not 100%, but we're getting updates on reopening soon there. So
well, my sense is that if you decide to do something online, there are people here that would probably like to participate. So let me just thank you so much, Don, for doing this. And let me just check if there's any other questions or anything here. All I'm getting is all kinds of great notes about how great you were, Don. So thank you very much. If anybody have any kind of a quick question? Steve Patrick wrote me a note. I think he may be gone, but he said, I hope everyone is taking notes by each painting that's coming along, because there's just so much to learn from each of the comments and all the paintings. So anyway, that was his thought, as he may still be here. But anyway, yeah, if you want to make that comment, Steve.
I just wanted to make sure everybody is aware of the value Don is bringing, because it's years of experience that he's just giving us all. And I told Mary that I've seen about 5 years of growth in about 4 short months, long months, I'll say, of work, and everybody's work is really, really improving. So congratulations to everybody from these weekly critique sessions, and I think it's really, really taken hold.
Want to share your notes?
No, I did.
I mean, with everybody.
No. Thanks, Don.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Don.
You're
Just
welcome.
to mention, Kevin McPherson has agreed to come on. I think you might have seen his ad. He's going to be one of our, and Collie Wisson, and will be coming in the next few weeks. I'm not sure all dates, but those are 2 of the other people that we have lined up, as well as Frankie Johnson. And we'll probably do some recycling of some folks too, of some of the other people. By the way, let me just say to you, I've had comments from a couple different people who have said, how about if we invite certain people, if you know those teachers, and they have to be teachers, they have to be people that are in galleries, they have to be people that we respect as teachers, not just buddies that went to art school. What we want to do is you contact me and I'll give you a template that I send out to folks, and you can be the contact, because I don't need to be the contact, but I will be glad to take it from there once you make that. Okay, so I see one other last chat thing, and that was a thank you to Don. Great session. Anyway, all right, everyone, thank you so much. Hope to see you next week for our first paint out, and then we will have Wednesday night after that will be our first evening critique on the whatever the Wednesday after the 11th is. So thanks everybody, and happy 4th of July.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Have a good
Don.
day.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Don.
Thanks, Mary.
Mary.
Thanks, Mary.
Happy 4th.
Thank you so much. It was awesome.
Thank you.